in order to reach the type of curiosity that we humans have, which is unique. There is no other animal that asks the question why. Animals are curious, but they don't ask why. And I discuss experiments that demonstrate that they don't ask why.
His new book, Why? What Makes Us Curious, investigates the innate human desire to understand, examined through interviews with famous thinkers and creatives, as well as through the lives of two of the most curious geniuses, Leonardo da Vinci and Richard Feynman. Adam Rees, Nobel Prize winner in physics, calls Why a fascinating quest to understand the origin and mechanisms of our curiosity. We're very pleased to bring the discussion to Harvard Bookstore tonight. Please join me in welcoming Mario Livio.
So let me start. First of all, why did I decide to write a book about curiosity, being an astrophysicist? I'm not a neuroscientist nor a psychologist. So the answer actually is very simple. It's because I'm very, very curious. And I'm so curious that at one point I became curious about curiosity. Now, you may be curious about this abstract painting that I have here. Well, it's there simply because it hides the question mark that is on the cover of the book. I want to start with the same way that I start the book, which is with a certain author, Kate Chopin, who is a 19th century American author, lived in Louisiana much of her life, wrote mostly short stories, but also a couple of novels. She married a Frenchman, Oscar Chopin, and lived in that house that's in that picture over there. The reason I started the book with her was because of one of her short stories, which is called The Story of an Hour. It's a very, very short story. In fact, the whole story, you see, fits on less than one page in Vogue when it was published in 1894. I was very impressed with this short story because it starts with this sentence: knowing that Mrs. Mullard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. You can hardly start a short story with a better sentence than this. In one sentence, she packs death and human frailty. And actually, she goes on like this. You know how some TV programs, they put artificial cliffhangers at the end of episodes and so on? She, with no effort, she puts an intellectual cliffhanger in every sentence that she writes. Now, what types of curiosity are there? So there was this psychologist, a British-Canadian, Daniel Berline, and he tried to place curiosity on a two-dimensional grid in which one axis runs from perceptual curiosity to epistemic curiosity, and I'll explain what each one of those means, and the other from diversive curiosity to specific curiosity. The reason he did this categorization was because he thought that in this way you can place then any type of curiosity on this kind of plane. Now, what are these things? Perceptual curiosity. Perceptual curiosity is what you feel when you are surprised, when there is something that doesn't agree with what you know, or when you're perplexed or you see something ambiguous. Think, for example, of these Asian children seeing a white girl for the first time in their lives. That's perceptual curiosity. Look at their faces, look at their eyes. I mean, they didn't even know such a thing exists. On the other end of that axis was epistemic curiosity. That's the true love of knowledge, what Thomas Hobbes called the lust of the mind. That's when we want to learn. That's what drives all research. Look at these children here, trying to understand why. That's the main question here in the title of the book. Why do these things grow? Why do they grow the way they do? How do they do that? And so on. Then there is diversive curiosity. Diversive curiosity is what you see here. These Dutch children sit next to one of the greatest masterpieces of Western art. This is Rembrandt's The Night Watch in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And look what they're doing. Not one of them looks at the painting. They are all searching for text messages on their phones. That's diversive curiosity, okay? Or when you wait for the new iPhone model to show up and you're wondering what will be there. Interestingly enough, this same painting, the Night Watch, actually was also the cause for an event which caused very, very strong perceptual curiosity, and I want to show you that now.
Shoppers in the Dutch city of Breda get more than they bargained for after actors storm the shopping centre dressed in 17th century outfits. Abseiling from ropes and jumping from balconies, the group was staging a reconstruction of Rembrandt's painting The Night Watch to promote the reopening of the Rijksmuseum.
So they staged The Night Watch inside the shopping mall in order to announce the reopening. The Rijksmuseum was closed for renovations and to do this. Finally, there is there is specific curiosity. That's simply, when you need a particular piece of information, like who was it that wrote that book, L? Or, who is this? Does anybody know by any chance? This is Ernest Hemingway. Or, who said, we're all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. You know that? That's Oscar Wilde. I like to say usually that between Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, Mark Twain, and possibly Woody Allen, they said all the one-liners that are worth saying, and the rest is, just repetition. It's a bit like Alfred North Whitehead once, philosopher and mathematician, once wrote that all of Western philosophy is just a series of footnotes to Plato. So that's the way I feel about this. So these are the types of curiosity. Now, you heard already that I actually decided to look at two of the most curious people to have ever lived. In fact, one of them was called by Kenneth Clark the most relentlessly curious person to have ever lived, and that's Leonardo, of course. Leonardo, of course, left us many fantastic works of art, but in addition, he did drawings for inventions and all kinds of things. Basically, we have some 6,500 pages of his notebooks, out of about 15,000 that probably existed. When you look at his notebooks, at first it looks like a collection of unrelated doodles. But once you start looking more carefully, you see that there is some pattern there, and it usually has to do with something like this, that he starts with some phenomenon, like maybe waves in water or something like that, and then his mind apparently transforms that into some sort of a geometrical curve, which he then does some geometry about. And then he starts thinking, where else do I see curves of that nature? And from that he comes to various clouds or the hair of this old man and things like this. So you can almost see the meanderings of his curiosity as he goes from one, topic to another. Now, what was he curious about? Everything. There is almost no topic that he wasn't interested in, except one, perhaps, politics. He wasn't interested at all in politics, and that was very wise of him, because he lived at the time of the Borgias, and anyone who got interested in politics at the time of the Borgias got themselves killed. He, on the other hand, got funding from the Borgias, so, it was good. Of course, he was interested in anatomy, in particular the human heart, did a lot on that. Unlike people of his time, who used basically to do dissections only in order to prove what Galen said in the 2nd century, he used to do dissections in order to find out new things. And he found out, for example, on the heart, he found the atria, which were not known before, and their role. He found how heat is generated in the body and things like that. The second person I looked at was Richard Feynman. Feynman was, of course, a legendary physicist. Some people called him the Sherlock Holmes of physics because he could see clues which nobody could see. You know, Sherlock Holmes could look at me and say, oh, I see that you have been recently to Afghanistan, and you know that your wife does this and that, and all that he sees from the way my elbows look and things like that. Feynman could say things like this about physics. He could see clues where nobody could see them. But in addition to doing physics, you know, he was playing the bongos. He went to Brazil, actually, to study drumming. He learned to draw from his friend, Zorthian, the painter. He learned how to draw. He was interested in Mayan hieroglyphs. He was interested in safe cracking, lots of things. If you take a page from his notebooks, it looks something like this. And there is something very amazing about this page, which is the mathematics is, of course, much more sophisticated than Leonardo's. The drawing is, of course, much worse than Leonardo's. But overall, the two pages could have almost come from the same notebook. So these people were really interested in everything. Now, what can we say about theories of curiosity? So there was this psychologist, well, not was, I should say is, because he's still alive and very active, George Lowenstein at Carnegie Mellon. And he came up with this theory of curiosity, which says that it's called the information gap theory. And the idea is the following, that when do we become curious, he says? It is when we see something that doesn't quite agree with what we know or think we know, and that generates some sort of a gap in our mind, and we feel that we absolutely need to acquire more knowledge in order to close that gap. Basically, he says that curiosity is associated with an aversive feeling, with a negative feeling, well, a bit like an itch that you need to scratch. That's the idea. And plus, there is something that's associated with curiosity, that if you plot curiosity as a function of knowledge, you get something like this inverted U-shaped curve, which means if you know very little about something, you're not very curious about this, because you don't know what to be curious about. If you know a lot about something, you're also not very curious about it, because you feel that you know almost everything. It's only if you know something about the topic, but feel or know that there is more to be known, that's when you become really curious. That's what this curve says. Now, oddly enough, you're not going to believe this, but a former Secretary of Defense, even though he was not talking about curiosity at all, but he somehow captured this notion, but without referring to it. Basically, he was, this is Donald Rumsfeld, he was at a press conference, and he was asked, this was in 2012, he was asked, what about the fact that there is no evidence that Iraq is transferring weapons of mass destruction to terrorist organizations? In answer to this question, at a press conference, he gave the following answer.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
So this was his answer. Now, there is a British organization which gives every year the Foot in the Mouth Award, and they gave it to him on that year for the most baffling statement made by a politician. Now, let me say something. His statement, as I will show you in a second, is actually, logically, it is perfect. It is just a bizarre answer to the question that he was asked. But logically, it is a perfect answer. By the way, the runner-up that same year was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, for the statement, I think that gay marriage is something between a man and his wife. And I think he should have gotten the first prize, actually, but for that. Now, look, what Rumsfeld said, there are known knowns. These are things we know we know. This is when you know almost everything and you're not curious about it. Then there are known unknowns. These are things you know that you don't know. That's when your curiosity is piqued. That's the middle of that inverted U curve. And then there are unknown unknowns. These are things we don't know, and you're not curious about them because they're really... Now, he wasn't talking about curiosity, but his statement could have been applied to curiosity. Okay, now, there have been experiments done in neuroscience trying to understand the mechanisms in the brain that are responsible for the states of mind that we call curiosity. And in particular, perceptual curiosity was studied by this Dutch neuroscientist named Marieke Jepma. And what they did is the following. They showed the subjects blurred images of known objects, like an accordion, okay? And they made them curious that way, to try to find out what that is. But at the same time, they put them inside functional MRI and looked at which areas of their brain were activated when they become curious that way. And what they found was that the areas that become curious in perceptual curiosity are indeed areas that are associated with conflict, or like with hunger, or with thirst. So basically, this was consistent with the idea that perceptual curiosity, at least, is associated with an unpleasant state, with an aversive state. This confirmed the idea of the psychology side, that those are the areas of the brain that are activated. There was another experiment done about epistemic curiosity, and this was done by a researcher named Kang and her collaborators. And what they did is they tried to generate epistemic curiosity, that's the love of knowledge, wanting to learn. How did they do that? With trivia questions. So they would ask, which musical instrument was invented in order to resemble a human voice, for example? Do you know which one? The violin. Violin. So they asked questions like this, made the people epistemically curious, and looked at which areas of the brain light up in that sense. And what they've discovered, that these are different areas of the brain. These are areas associated with an anticipation of reward, with pleasure. It's the type of feeling you feel when somebody is about to give you a piece of chocolate. Or when you sit in a theater for a play you wanted for a long time to see, and you're just there before the curtain goes up. In other words, perceptual curiosity and epistemic curiosity appear to be different things, both in terms of the state of mind, the psychological state of mind that they create, and in terms of the areas of the brain that are being actually activated. In fact, I would go so far as to say that it is possible that had we known these things to begin with, we might have even not used the same word, curiosity, for the two types of curiosity. Maybe, we would have used interest for this pleasurable curiosity, and anxiety for the other one, or something like this. But it's a completely different thing. Now, all these experiments that I described so far were done with adults. In fact, there used to be a joke in psychological circles that all experiments in psychology are actually done with freshman or sophomore students, so that all the findings should only apply to that kind of demographic. But in recent years, there's more and more. Let me just stop this for a second, because I want to explain the experiment a little bit. So they are doing now experiments with very, very small children. And I'll show you here one such experiment. What they do is the researcher showed the small child, which you cannot tell if it's a boy or a girl, some sort of a toy that when she presses a button, it does a certain noise. And you will see what happens after that. So there is that green toy, she presses it, and it does a noise. Now look what the child does. The child wants it. She shows again how she presses, and again the child wants it. Now she doesn't immediately give the child that. She shows her two other things. She put the red thing there, and now she gives the green thing. The child immediately tries to press the button and it doesn't do any noise. So what does the child do? Asks the parent, you know, maybe she, let's call her she, is doing something wrong. Now she gives her one that looks a little bit different and also has a different color. The child is already a bit frustrated that the thing doesn't work, but she decides to try again to press, still doesn't work. So there is another possibility, it's broken. So she tries this. But now, look, she sees the red one that she left over there. So look what she does now. Okay, so what have we seen here? These are very small children. Very, very small children can distinguish already when there is this confounded evidence, you know, things that you don't know what exactly is the interpretation. She already tried two things. One is, I'm doing something wrong, and therefore let my parent try to do this. Or the thing is really broken, so I'm going to bang it, you know, and so on. Children, by and large, turns out, try to search mostly for causes for effects. They learn very early on that every effect is linked to some cause, and they try to actually discover those causes so as to reduce to a minimum the errors they do in predicting things. That's the situation that evolves. I want to go here only for no more than half an hour, so I'm going to skip now all kinds of things and just go towards the end of this because I want to say a couple more things before I finish. One is, you might have thought that everybody wants always to encourage curiosity because it is so good, you know. I mean, this is how we learn. This is education. This is research. This is all of that. Art. How do you do art? You know, music and so on. But it's not always the case that this is what happens. Even in fairy tales, you see, this is from Hansel and Gretel. They go exploring in the forest. Hansel and Gretel, they find this house made of candy. They want to try to eat it. They fall into the hands of a cannibalistic witch. That's not exactly great encouragement of curiosity on parts of the Brothers Grimm. But it's more than that, really. It's in 1937, the Nazis organized the Degenerate Art Exhibit in Munich. Basically, they took all the modern artists of the time and put them in one exhibit, which was meant to convince the public that this art is just done by Jewish communists against the German people. This is Goebbels visiting that exhibit. But it's not just that. I mean, if you think that all of this happened some time ago, you're mistaken. The Taliban, you know what they did? They dynamited the Buddhas of Bamiyan. 100 feet tall things from the 6th century. They dynamited them. Why? The Islamic State fundamentalists destroyed works of art in Palmyra, in Syria. So I coined a phrase, which I'm very proud of. By the way, as I will show you in a minute, after I coined it, I discovered that I wasn't the absolutely first to, well, maybe in not exactly those words, but others coined it too, which is very nice because it means other people thought about this too. The phrase I coined was, curiosity is the best remedy for fear. What do I mean by that? Look, very often, the things we are afraid of are things we don't know enough about or don't understand. Curiosity is the remedy for that. And I told you that somebody else thought about this. Oh, this is, of course, Malala Yousafzai was attacked by the Taliban because she advocated education for young Pakistani girls. Luckily, she survived. She went on to win the Nobel Prize, a Peace Prize, and just about a month ago, she finished her studies. Here, in an art exhibit in Copenhagen in 2008, they coined a very similar phrase. You see, replace fear of the unknown with curiosity. Now, You heard that I interviewed 9 very curious people for this book, and I will just run them through now. I will not talk about them much. This is Freeman Dyson. This is Noam Chomsky. This is Tori Musgrave. This is Fabiola Gianotti. This is Marilyn Vos Savant. This is Jack Horner, Martin Rees, Brian May, and Vic Muniz. You may know some of these names. I'll just mention a few. Brian May, famous lead guitarist of the rock band Queen, but he is also a PhD in astrophysics. He was the chancellor of a university, and he is a great expert in Victorian stereophotography. He is also an incredible activist for rights of animals. Take Fabiola Gianotti. She's the Director General of CERN, the European Center for Nuclear Research. She led one of the 2 groups that discovered the Higgs boson. But before she became this famous physicist, she actually had a degree in music, and she's an accomplished pianist who plays till this very day, and so on. I will finish now with one of my favorite people, Leonardo, who said once, "Blinding ignorance does mislead us. O wretched mortals, open your eyes." And my icon in science, Albert Einstein, who kept opening his eyes. Here is once, here is twice, and here is thrice. Thank you very much.
I saw a video
Yes,
on YouTube that you were in.
I was in.
Yeah, you were part of it. It was
Okay.
about mathematics.
Okay.
And you described how curious it is that you can almost exactly calculate the value of pi by using
A Buffon needle.
lines.
A Buffon needle,
Right.
yes.
And what I'm curious to know is there a proof for that?
Yes, yes. So the proof is actually quite easy. Okay, so just to describe to those who don't know what the Buffon needle is it is named after Comte de Buffon, which was a French mathematician. So basically, if you take it's not the kind of piece of paper that I showed in the video, but if you take a very large thing where you have parallel lines drawn on it at a constant distance, and you take a certain needle or a stick, which has the length, which is exactly the distance between 2 parallel lines, and you simply drop it at random. And you count the number of times that this stick crosses a line versus the total number, because sometimes it doesn't cross, it falls between lines. It turns out that the probability for it to cross a line is 2 over pi. In other words, if you throw these millions of times, then you can actually, just from counting the times it crosses a line, actually derive the value of pi, even though it appears to have nothing to do with circles and things like that and so on. Now, it turns out that, I'll just hint to you the way the proof was. I mean, it has to do with the angle, and that's where pi comes in.
There's
Okay.
an applied circle in between any 2 parallel lines, isn't there?
No, not that. It's the fact that you have to take the angle at which the thing is, and you have to then go to pi. But yes, there is a very precise proof to that, and it's actually easy.
I came to your talk tonight, thank you, it was very interesting, thinking that I would hear a lot about the theory of evolution.
Yes.
And I'm curious, did you,
Yes.
in your book, discuss
Yes,
that?
and
Give us a hint.
yes, and you may have seen that I skipped some things where there were some gorillas in it and things and whatnot. And Lucy, there was the skeleton of Lucy. Yes. So well, so first of all, of course, curiosity is developed as an answer to an evolutionary requirement, because you know, in order to understand your environment and to survive and so on, you needed to be curious. However, evolution alone does not fully explain the question of curiosity because we are curious also about many things which are certainly not immediately are necessary for survival. So there is one thing that I discuss actually at some length in the book, and that is in order to reach the type of curiosity that we humans have, which is unique. There is no other animal that asks the question why. Animals are curious, but they don't ask why. And I discuss experiments that demonstrate that they don't ask why, okay? So the question is, how did our brain develop to be able to ask the question why? And at the end of the day, it has to do with the number of neurons in our cerebral cortex and in our striatum, which is 3 times more than the next one that comes after us. And the reason that we have that is twofold. One has to do with the fact that all primates are able to pack more neurons into smaller volumes. And the second has to do with ways that through evolution we learned to make more efficient use of energy by cooking, by walking upright and things like that. And I discuss all of those questions, yes. Other questions? Yes?
Hey, so I have kind of a two-part question. So the first one, first of all, this is very interesting.
Thank you.
For sharing your insights with us. So the first one is kind of, in your explorations and studies of all these amazing figures, have you made any observations on habits that enhance the feeling of curiosity in people? And the second one is...
Let me answer this first because then I will not remember your first part.
Okay.
So I reach a certain age where I need to take things in small pieces. Yes. So how do you become more curious and so on? I'm not a specialist in education. I want to emphasize this. But there are a few things that I managed to distill from what I heard from all these people and so on. All of them were, first of all, very curious as children. All of them were very, very curious as children. And I mean, not just curious in the sense of that they constantly ask why. Most children do that. But also curious about more complex things like why are there tides in the sea, and things like that. So they were very, very curious. There are ways to encourage these things, and one of them is through asking questions but not giving immediate answers. Namely, you can ask a child, let's say the child asks you, why is this da-da-da? So you say, why do you think it is? And the child will tell you something, and then you say, okay, let's test that, and so on. So this type of an exchange. This reminds me of this person who goes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, why every time I ask you a question, you answer with a question? So he says, why not? Yeah. So that's one thing. But the second thing is more important, perhaps, which is to follow the curiosity that the children or the people already have. I'll give you an example. You see, suppose we want to teach children science. Let's say we want to teach them something about free fall acceleration. Now, most children think that learning about free fall acceleration bores them stiff. However, most American children, at least, are fascinated by dinosaurs. So start with dinosaurs. Don't start with the other things. Start with what they're already interested in. Talk about dinosaurs. All kinds of things about dinosaurs that they really want to know about. And then you can go on and say, and the dinosaurs, they became extinct because an asteroid came and hit the Earth. And do you know why that's hitting the Earth? Because of gravity, that asteroid is accelerating towards the Earth. So, you get to something you wanted, but from something they were really interested in. The second part of your question?
The second part is, aside from curiosity, what are you curious about?
Oh, I'm curious about lots of things, and actually this is exactly why I wrote this book. Because you see, I've been an astrophysicist all my life, so I'm curious about the universe. Yes, I try to solve problems about the universe. But I was always an art fanatic, for example. I I'm a scientist, so I don't have much money, so I don't own art, but I own the second best thing, books on art. I own thousands of books on art. I am interested in music. I am the science advisor to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. I participated in the creation of something called the Hubble Cantata by composer Paola Prestini. I kind of inspired that, but of course she wrote the music, and we had another person write the libretto, and somebody did actually even a virtual reality part to it. And we already played it at the Kennedy Center in DC. We played it in Brooklyn Park, and we're having it in October at the LA Opera. So yeah, so I'm curious about many things. Other questions? Yes.
Hey there, thanks for the talk also. I guess throughout your research and your interviews, did you find a clear distinction between curiosity or creativity on the EQ side versus the IQ side? That's saying, you know, scientific curiosity versus creative artistic.
So there is one thing which I did not do, but somebody else did. There is this psychologist, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's now retired, but he used to be at the University of Chicago. And he interviewed once about 100 highly creative people. And he found that, you know, they are very different. And they were people from sciences, from arts, from economics, from whatever, you know, and so on. One thing that he found that was common to all of them, that they were all extremely curious. So it appears that curiosity is an essential ingredient of creativity. And you can even understand this in a way, right? Because creativity often involves bringing things from different disciplines, you know, together, taking ideas from one field and applying them to another and things like that. And that's what curious people do. So curiosity and creativity are not the same thing. But curiosity appears to be a necessary condition for creativity. Other questions? Yes?
Have you found that curiosity, there's a relationship to whether, the nature and nurture kind of question, of whether people who have been encouraged to be curious are more curious than people who have been discouraged?
So it's always exactly comes down to exactly the nature versus nurture question. Namely, it has been shown that actually, essentially all psychological traits, curiosity included, and this was found in large experiments with identical twins reared apart and so on, there is a large genetic component to curiosity, a large genetic component, you know, at the 40-50% level, it's genetic. However, it's not 100% genetic, so that's where the nurture comes in. In other words, indeed, you know, children that have been encouraged to be curious, and also who the conditions allowed them to be curious about many things. You see, if the children of refugees that need to cross on foot borders of countries and need to look for food all the time or shelter, they may be curious about where to find the food, but they cannot start to contemplate the meaning of life, you know, things like that. So yes, there is this other component. They need to have the conditions, and they need to also have the encouragement. Yes?
I was always curious where that saying came from, curiosity killed the cat.
Yes.
But, I tell you what, since you give me one question, let me ask another question if I might. There was something that says, when you said, what's the meaning of life? There's another one, who do I have faith in, who do I trust? That's faith and trust. Like they say, you try something 9 times, it doesn't work, go back and do it like your mother told you to in the first place. So I have faith in Mother or Mother Teresa or Buddha or something, or unanswered questions. Like your defense secretary, your Uncle Stilskin, or whatever his name is, said, 98% of the time we don't know what we don't know, so I gotta have faith in something. So at some time you gotta stop curiosity and say, I gotta jump and have faith in something.
I understand. Okay.
Are we back to curiosity and who I should have faith in?
Let's start with the curiosity killed the cat. So curiosity killed the cat was originally this phrase, it's from the 16th century or so, and it actually said care killed the cat, where care meant grief. And for some mysterious reason, at the end of the 19th century, that was turned into curiosity killed the cat. Now, I don't know why it was turned like that into that, but clearly that is the same type of warning that is in the fairy tales that I described and in other things. Yes, of course, for example, in the Middle Ages, the church or sometimes somebody else wanted to build walls around certain types of knowledge, and that's part of that. Now, going back to your second question, that's a little bit more complicated. I'll address it in a slightly different way. I strongly believe that all the original or the initial myths, religions, things like that, originated in curiosity. Because what were they trying to do? They were, overwhelmed with, a universe that could not be understood, certainly then and even now to some extent. And then they searched for all kinds of whys. And the whys led to a variety of stories, of myths, of religions, and things like that. So that relates to your, you have to have faith in something. Yes?
My first question was about cultivating heightened curiosity in a later age. And my second question was about technology inhibiting curiosity.
Yes.
And historical developments.
Yes. So first of all, developing curiosity at a later age. So what studies show is that there are certain types of curiosity that somewhat decline with age. In particular, the diversive and perceptual, namely the ability to be surprised and that continuous search toward of boredom. Those tend to decline somewhat with age. However, epistemic curiosity, the love of knowledge, wanting to learn, actually appears to stay constant across all ages. So you can definitely continue to do that. And if you want to encourage your perceptual curiosity to stay more alive, then, try to surprise yourself and others every day or every week, with something. So, you can do that. But it is still the case that your willingness to take risks for novelty declines with age, for sure. Now, concerning technology, so the question is, does Wikipedia or the availability of information literally at our fingertips, does that somehow kill curiosity? In my opinion, it does not, because I'll tell you what those things do. What those things do is they make it much easier for us to answer questions related to specific curiosity. Namely, I need to know the answer, who said blah, blah, blah. That I can find immediately. But that's in a way good because, why would I spend 2 days, searching for something like this, which at the end is a tiny piece of information that I need? For the really big question, you cannot find the answers there anyhow, because science is trying to find answers for questions we don't know the answers to yet. And therefore, you cannot find those answers on the internet. So I think that the internet, at the end of the day, it can actually even encourage curiosity in people who have the curiosity from within. And it does not really kill curiosity. It makes you perhaps less, spend time. I mean, I must admit, you see, I'm a person like this, that if I don't remember what was the name of the actor who appeared in last week's film, I may, for 3 hours, I'm really in suffering because my brain keeps working on that. Now I can search for it, but this is now something that's very particular to me. I still like to spend maybe an hour on this before I search, because I try to find the answer. And only if I see that, okay, I need to be rescued from my agony, then, okay, I look at that. Okay, maybe we'll take one more question and then we'll sign books. Yes?
How did you choose the 9 examples in your book? And is there a distinction between the depth of curiosity? For example, a dilettante who is interested in surface level knowledge about different topics versus somebody who wants to go much deeper and get mastery or expertise?
Right. So how did I choose? I literally, sat there and thought to myself, who do I regard today as the equivalent of the polymath, of people who know all kinds of things, are interested in all kinds of things. And those 9 names were the names that I came up with. Now, I came up with more names and was unable to, for various reasons, technical reasons, to get to interview them. I can tell you that I had Jane Goodall as one of my people, and I was promised that I will get to talk to her. She's now quite old, but at the end it didn't work out, and so on. So I had a few more that it didn't work out. But all these people, I thought that they really satisfy the criterion of this. Now, in terms of being superficially curious or not, and so on, the people I looked at were not, none of them were superficially curious. I mean, because you see, I saw that somebody wrote a review which said that I did not actually choose curious people, I just chose successful people. Not true, absolutely not true. I wasn't looking for successful people. I definitely looked for people that I thought were very, very curious. Now, what is true is that, it is very possible, and based on your question, I would say even probable, for example, that you are a very curious person yourself, yes? But how would I choose you? I don't know who you are or where you are, and so on. So clearly I chose people who are somewhat known, yes? I mean, it's not, I didn't choose them because they are successful. I chose them because I know about them. And okay, the fact that I know about them means that probably they were also somewhat successful, yes? But that's it. So the people I chose were not diversity of curiosity in principle can go very shallow. You can know lots of information at a very shallow level. I don't know personally. You may remember there was this guy Ken Jennings on Jeopardy, who was just like a human Google. That he won 74 times, and I mean his ability. It was not just what he knew. I mean, many times the others that competed with him also knew, but his ability to bring the answer as quickly as he did, I thought was absolutely phenomenal. Now, I do not know to what extent he knows deeply in any of those areas. I mean, clearly he cannot know deeply in all those areas because he was answering questions about yachting and question about, European literature and I don't know what. But so maybe his most of his knowledge is really only, not that deep. But it's possible that I think he was a computer scientist, right, or something like this. So he probably has quite deep knowledge in his particular field. So, yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll sign books.